Jerry DeWitt is our speaker today. He became an atheist after more than 25 years of Pentecostal ministry in his home state of Louisiana. His ministry experience began at the early age of 17. He was the assistant pastor of 2 United Pentecostal churches and 1 apostolic church. During his dilemma with doubt, Jerry held the senior pastorate of 2 congregations, one charismatic Dominionist and the other non-denominational fundamentalist. Jerry holds the distinction of being the first graduate of and spokesman for the Clergy Project. And the Clergy Project is a private, invitation-only safe house community of current and former ministers who no longer hold the supernatural beliefs of their religious traditions. And that project was started by Richard Dawkins and Dan Barker. Most recently, Jerry was appointed Executive Director of Recovering from Religion, which was founded by Dr. Darrell Ray, author of The God Virus. Their mission is to coordinate and facilitate face-to-face meetings for those who desire support in leaving their religion. And they also facilitate online forums and resources in cooperation with other secular organizations and groups. Jerry will also be speaking this March at the American Atheist National Convention, which myself and Joe and Susan and Mark are going to, at least. Anybody else going to that? Yay, okay, great. Oh, you're going, and wonderful. That immediately follows the Reason Rally in Washington, D.C. So please, without further ado, let's welcome Jerry DeWitt.
Well, where in the world to start? It's been a journey of 25 years, so I think I've got plenty of stories to tell, but I'll try not to take up all your time. Matter of fact, I'll use a preacher's trick and put my watch down here so I can watch how long I've entertained you or bored you one. I'd really kind of like to get through my story, or at least parts of it, as quickly as possible so I can take your questions, because that's the part that I find most interesting and that I tend to grow the most from, because you'll ask me things I haven't thought about yet. I was speaking in Kansas City Saturday night, and I brought out a little business card which had my notes on it. And I said to him, I said, the good news is this is all the notes I have. The bad news is this is all the notes I have. You've got worse news. I don't have that card. So we're just gonna kind of fly by the seat of our pants. But I actually do have something I'd like to share with y'all that I think maybe be a concise thought before it's all said and done. But before I do that, I'm really appreciative of Susan and the connection that we've made on the internet, and she's been very, very kind to work all of these details out as I'm passing back to Louisiana. I'm kind of on tour, which is kind of a strange thing. It's kind of like maybe a circus trick or something. I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to feel about all this. You know, people are really excited about showing me off like I've, got an eye in the back of my head or something. And I guess maybe I do have an eye that some people don't have. I'm not sure about that. That was metaphysical. Don't worry about that. But it is an honor to be able to be with you, and it's an honor to get to know everybody. This has been a fantastic journey. And it's probably important for you to understand just how new and short this journey is for me. I preached my last, it's not fair to call it a Pentecostal message, because I haven't really been preaching Pentecostal or Christian messages for a while. It's just I was preaching what I was preaching to Pentecostals, so, they didn't really know what I was doing. But the last one I preached was actually in April of last year. So that's pretty recent, so I'm pretty new. So if I make any mistakes, or if I say something that's not completely scientifically accurate, you'll have to forgive me. I will be referring to our hearts, and I know that is not the seat of our emotions, that we do have brains, and that's not what the organ actually does. I have watched a little bit of the Science Channel. But it'll slip out, and it will be intentional. Heart will be intentional before the evening is over. And if I get a little preachery, which I doubt very seriously I do, because where in the hell is the pulpit? I almost don't know how to function without having something to, hold on and bang whenever I get excited, or to place my Bible or my watch. So, but before the night's over, I may say or act in a way that reveals just exactly how new I am to this situation. As I said, in April of last year, I preached my last message. In May, I joined the Clergy Project, and I hope to get to telling you why I did that and how that came about. So I kind of rode under the radar till about August or September, whenever I was asked to do an interview on Free Thought Radio with Dan Barker, because Dan Barker's with the Clergy Project, and I got to know him. And then in October, we had the Houston Free Thought Convention. That was the first meeting like that I'd ever attended. I didn't know all of you people were so nice or could drink so much. It was really interesting to watch. And I think I was as nice, but I didn't drink anything because it was just too fun to watch, you know. So hadn't been seeing that kind of fun in a long time, if ever. And so then in November, well, actually, when I came back from the convention, I had taken a beautiful picture with Richard Dawkins, and I wanted to name drop, and I wanted to show off and impress my friends, and even though I knew none of them would know who he was, so I thought it's kind of safe to put it out on Facebook. And if you don't know, Facebook is not a private thing. Y'all knew that already? Why didn't somebody tell me? No, and not only did I know it wasn't a private thing, I knew that I'd made so many wonderful friends like Sky. When I was in Houston, I knew they'd be connecting back with me, so I thought I better get on Facebook and make some changes on my profile page so when they look at it, they're not like, who did I meet when I was in Houston? And so I made these changes, and I have this beautiful aunt, United Pentecostal great aunt, that apparently at the age of 735 knows how to work Facebook. And she has destroyed my life. Thank you very much, Aunt. And I won't call her by name, but she knows who she is. And she got on Facebook, and I mean, before November was over, everybody that I'd ever known, everybody I'd ever preached for, everybody that I'd ever shared, family reunion with, everybody knew what I had done and how horrible of a person I was. And so it was, kind of like running your speedometer backwards. I could just watch people unfriend, just as it was moving along. And so November was horrible. So I thought that was as bad as it could get. On December the 1st, my boss, who by that time had become my best friend, my secular boss, because I had been slowly moving my way out of the ministry for a while, invited me to the waffle shop so that he could fire me publicly, which almost felt more like a divorce than being fired. And it was really, good drama. He did it really well. It's like he'd fired hundreds of people, which I knew that he hadn't, or hundreds of atheists even, and I knew that he hadn't done that. He just showed up with a little book, and inside that book, unbeknownst to me, was a printout of the homepage of the Clergy Project, which had my name on it, and a printout of the homepage of the old Recovering from Religion website, which had my picture on it, because by then I'd been asked to be the executive director of Recovering from Religion. No, you don't get your $5 back because it's not a paid position. It's actually cost me a lot of money. So anyway, so he fires me on December the 1st. So that kind of brings us up to just how fresh and raw these things are. So I'm trying to be funny to keep from just laying down on the floor and crying over how all of this is come about. Now, as some of my closest friends love to remind me, this is all my own damn fault. Because what I could have done is just continued to pretend to believe what I didn't believe. And that kind of segues into what I'd like to talk about for just the next few minutes. And just to be cute and hopefully to give you something that you might remember from here on out, I'd kind of like to title it, kind of like a message or a country song if you prefer. I'd kind of like to title this little set of thoughts, Caught Between Little Rock and a Heart Place. Caught between Little Rock and a heart place. How many of you grew up religious? Almost all of you, of course, obviously. That's the quickest way, right? And so I did to a great extent. My life was very, very chaotic. My dad, who was an Assembly of God preacher's son, was killed in a drunk driving accident of his own making right before I turned 3 years old. And so for most of my life, I felt as if the pressures of being a preacher's son probably played a large part into him self-medicating to try to relieve some of that pressure. I don't know that, but that's always been my theory. So from the very beginning, the only thing that my world revolved around was really my grandparents. That was the axis in the middle of my world, because everything else quickly got very chaotic. But it just so happened that my grandparents were Pentecostal, And we were a real strong version of Pentecostal called Apostolics. How many of you are aware of United Pentecostals? You know what that looks like, how they dress, how they do. Obviously, this doesn't fit in. This is about as rebellious as I am at the moment, you know. And so that was the environment that I was raised in. You know as well as I know that being raised in that type of environment is kind of like having a small rock, a little rock if you will, being put into the shoe of your mind, that no matter where you step, you feel it. You feel it with every single step. But unfortunately, with this particular rock, people sometimes find a way just to adapt to it, and they just consider it to be natural, regardless of the type of psychological pain that it may cause them or the discomfort it may cause them. And I think because it is with you every step of the way throughout your life, if you've been raised religious, you just think that's the way it is, that all mental shoes come with a rock in them. And it took me literally 25 years of being the guy who was attempting to put rocks in people's shoes for me to realize that that was not natural, that is not the default position of being a human being. So what was natural was that when I was about 17 and I began to try to find myself, through a very unique set of circumstances, I ended up in a place called none other than Baton Rouge, Louisiana. If you know anything about Pentecostalism and the southern parts of religion, then you'll know that that is the headquarters for Family Worship Center, which is pastored by a little-known evangelist named Jimmy Swaggart. And so at 17, looking for my way, looking for my life, my mom had got married and they had divorced, and there was just normal life, but still complicated. At 17, at an extremely vulnerable place in my life, I'm now at Family Worship Center with 8,000 screaming, excited Pentecostals, and it was literally the most amazing thing that I had seen within those first 17 years. And the message did exactly what it was supposed to do. It brought me back to the awareness of that little rock that was in the mind of my shoe, or the shoe of my mind, and it gave me some direction, it gave me some purpose, and immediately, no exaggeration, immediately I wanted to preach. Immediately I wanted to be in the ministry, because all I could see at that moment, all I could really see was what appeared to be the positive effect that this ministry, and I didn't get saved when Jimmy Swaggart was preaching, it was somebody else, so it's, probably valid. Everybody went through that. A lot of people went through that because they got saved when Jimmy Swaggart was preaching. After the fall, people began to question their salvation. That's really bizarre how this little rock works its way around in our shoe, isn't it? And so I immediately wanted to get in the ministry and immediately went into the ministry. I had a few little weird steps where I attended the Baptist church because that's where my girlfriend went, and that's just, a smart move, for a little while. And but eventually ended back up with my grandparents in the Pentecostal or Apostolic church. Unfortunately, as far as apparently my livelihood in this story has turned out thus far, unfortunately, my heart was kinder than my doctrine. And that was a problem. And I've stolen that line from a minister named Mike Williams in Houston, Texas. But that stuck with me, and I think that's a good explanation. Very quickly, I began to realize that I could not understand why that I was now going to heaven, that I was now saved, that I was now special, that I was now filled with the Spirit, and that I would enjoy all of eternity, when other people that I knew were just as good as me would have a very, very different experience if they died. And I also couldn't understand how this God that claimed to, or maybe was promoted as loving us unconditionally and completely and willing to make whatever sacrifice was necessary, had even allowed such a place as hell with its eternal consequences to even exist in the first place. For some reason, even at 17, it just didn't make sense to me. I was a believer. I was absolutely convinced at that time that I was filled with the Holy Spirit, and I dedicated my life to traveling across this country and preaching what I believed to be the good news. Unfortunately, as time went on, I found myself caught between that little rock that never wanted to go away in the shoe of my mind and a heart place, a place of a heart that was more compassionate than my doctrine. And that was a problem. But it turned out to be a good problem to have. And even before the internet, I know I don't look that old. I know you think I'm about 15 or 16. Don't mess with me. I've had a bad year. No. It was before the internet, or at least before the prevalence of the internet, and I actually had to go to places like this and try to talk to people older and smarter than me, and I began to see that there was a lot of other ways to interpret the Bible and a lot of other ideas out there about hell and salvation and all these things. Well, what that began to do is that began to put me in this great conflict between that rock and between my heart. Now I want to make just a small little insertion here because I think we're all engaged in the same mission. And the mission is we want to create a secular society, and we want to raise at least the next generation up to be free thinkers and to appreciate the values of reason and science for the betterment of the whole planet, obviously. I would say to you, if you're engaging religious people, if the rock in their shoe is so prevalent and that place in their heart is so small that they can accept that everybody but them are ultimately going to go to hell for all of eternity, if that's the way they feel, then I would say to hell with them, move on and try to find somebody else. Because what I'm discovering, and I'm new at this, and y'all can correct me when we get to the questions and answers, but to me it seems like that the motivation that brings all of us to this table is humanity and a love for humanity. I think we're all humanists at heart. And so all of a sudden in my life, it became as if there was a balance, as if there was a scale. And on one side of the scale was literally my conscience was being weighed. The scripture even talks about that, right? Your conscience, you've been laid in the balance and all this kind of stuff. In this one plate was my conscience that I was having to deal with day in and day out. But on the other side of the scale, after just a few years of ministry, was literally everything else. The lady that I had met and fallen in love with, I met her in a Pentecostal world, a Pentecostal environment. So what's going to happen to the relationship? All of my in-laws, what's going to happen to the relationships? Everyone who now knows me, everyone that I've preached for, everyone in my family, all of these relationships are now weighed in the balance against my conscience. It's this rock, and this heart place is now this great struggle. Well, time has a way of getting away from you. And once you're already engaged in a career and you're already building a reputation, time gets away from you really, really, really fast. Well, it didn't take too many years until I had some very serious problems in my doctrine. And I was looking for all kinds of help. I still believed in the supernatural for years. I still believed that Jesus was very real, and that all of a sudden I began to get into these ideas, these modes of thought, modes of Christianity that, well, what we really need is just the Jesus who talks about feeding the poor and loving your neighbors yourself and all of those good things. The problem I had was that damn book that some people refer to as the Bible. That was the problem, because everything was supposed to be based off of that. And based off of this real easy interpretation. If you'll just pray and ask the Holy Spirit to help you, then the whole thing would just be made clear and it'd be easy to understand. Well, the more I understood church history and the more I understood just how it really was to be a Christian and live out the Christian experience, then ultimately it became obvious that it wasn't really that easy. That's not exactly how it worked. So as the years passed by and I went from being an evangelist to a pastor, it was actually becoming a pastor that made the situation completely unbearable. And it's about them that I want to talk about for just the next couple of moments. It's really easy to hate those people. It really is. It's really easy to think that every one of them is just a shyster and every one of them knows better and they're just out for the money and they're out for the esteem and the ego stroking and all of those things. I will tell you from my experience in the Clergy Project, that may be true about a lot of them, but it's not true about all of them. Because the question is always that comes back to me is, well, why did you stay in the ministry anyway? And why did you stay so long once you started having doubts, or especially once you didn't believe in the supernatural at all? And my answer to that is, how long have you ever stayed in a bad relationship? Right? Can everybody say amen? How long do you stay in a bad relationship? How long do you stay at a job that you know is going nowhere and that you no longer believe in? How long do you stay in relationships? And the reality of it is that pastoring is really a relationship. It's a relationship to an identity that you've now created, either intentionally or unintentionally. And it's a relationship to your family, and it's a relationship to the community, and it's a relationship to people that you've now worked with in one way or the other, sometimes for dozens and dozens of years. So how long do you stay in that relationship? Do you just decide that you'll throw it all away in a moment and walk up to the pulpit and say, I'm divorcing you, and by the way, you can have the God? Everybody get that joke? That was really cute and sublime. Oh, wow. Come on, wake up, folks, now. How do you do it? How do you do something like that? How do you wreck your career? How do you destroy your identity? The phrase that I've now coined is identity suicide. Knowing good and well that when you come out as an unbeliever, that you are putting the gun to the head of an identity that you may have spent years creating, and when you pull the trigger, there's no coming back. No coming back. Oh, yes, I could get on Facebook and say, I repent, I was wrong, it was a joke. And am I going to get a church next week? No. No, it's identity suicide. And so all of this is weighing in the balance. At what point is your conscience more important than your marriage? At what point? At what point is your conscience more important than your income? We would all like to say that, oh, that's a no-brainer. You know, just quit, just get through it. Really? What about your child's college fund? What about your mortgage? What about your car note? Where are you going to live? How are you going to get out of town once everybody finds out you're an atheist? How's this going to work? What are the logistics of committing identity suicide? And so these people that I've met in the Clergy Project are just like me. They've walked around for years with a huge pain emanating from the shoe of their conscience. This huge pain. But they get to a place that they bear it not for themselves, because I think probably all husbands and all fathers know the feeling of wanting to just go steal somebody's Harley Davidson and ride to California and never look back, right? Can anybody else associate with that? You know, it's just like, you know, honey, not only can you keep the dog, you can keep the kids, and I'm just out of here, the pressure's too much, I'm going to go do something else, you know. And some of you have bought really nice cars to keep from doing that, and I understand. That's not towards you, Sky. I'm just realized how nice your car is. But the reality of it really is that these are very real situations. You know, it's easy for us to hide in this room or any of the other rooms all across the country and debate all of these important features, you know. What about this scripture? What about that scripture? Why can't they see evolution? It's so obvious. You know, they're just pretending not to see it. They really don't believe the world's ended. And it's easy to get into all of those things. But the reason it's not easy is because behind the decisions that have to be made when you confront the reality of those issues, those decisions are real and they're heavy. And on the Clergy Project, it's an internet, it's a forum where these preachers can go on there and they can communicate with each other. The traffic gets real heavy right before Sunday morning service and real heavy right after Sunday morning service. And I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, just like myself, the people that I know in the Clergy Project and the people that I pastor that are in this situation now, they're not getting up and telling people that there's a hell. And they're not getting up and promising people heaven. And they're not laying hands on the sick telling them that they're, don't go back to the doctor, your cancer's cured. They're not doing any of that. They're walking this real thin tightrope where they're getting up and basically preaching all that's left, love your neighbor as yourself, and they're saying it with just enough Christianese that it doesn't rise anyone's suspicion. They're humanist, but they're trapped in these careers. They're trapped in these situations. Now, very quickly, another little side note is that's what makes what you're doing so beautiful and so special. Because whether you realize it or not, even though you may compare your population inside a room like this to the population of Little Rock or of Arkansas and feel like it's insignificant in what's going on, the reality is not the same. The reality of it is that what you're doing is making a place where people can connect and relationships can be built. Because once that scale gets on the verge of tipping, the only thing that keeps a person from not only committing identity suicide, but keeps them from committing suicide over the loss is the relationships that they're then able to build within the free thought community. Does that make sense? It's important. What's going on is extremely, extremely important. So I'll skip real quick so we'll have plenty of time for questions, but I went through a series of evangelizing, and I went through a series of pastoring, and in some ways, unfortunate, I ended up pastoring an extremely charismatic church. And many of the members were Dominionists. They wouldn't call themselves this. Now, let me preface one quick thing. These people loved me. All right? I mean, they truly, truly did love me. And I really, really loved them. Because though the money was good at times, the money wasn't good enough to be in the emergency room at 2 o'clock. The money wasn't good enough to go through the grieving process with a family ever so often with funerals. The money wasn't good enough to watch people get married and destroy their lives. The money just wasn't that good. There was a joke in there. Nobody got it. Did you laugh? The money wasn't good enough for all of that. Right? I'm talking so serious, you know. Maybe Dr. Delray's have got y'all hypnotized, you know, at the moment. But the money was good, but the money wasn't good enough for all of those things because this is family. These are people you love. And in this charismatic church, they believed in healing and in taking control and that everything had a spirit behind it and all this demonology and all these things that by the time that I got there, they were going up on the scale of supernaturalism and I was coming way, 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 way down. And they didn't intend to do it and they never would have done it on purpose, but they really pushed me even further and further away from the supernatural because of the things that they expected. I don't know why any Baptist turns atheist, because you don't believe much to start with. That was another joke. Sorry, it wasn't funny. Too many Baptists in the room. You Pentecostals got it, no. But when you start believing that you really do have the power to lay your hands on the sick, and the people around you who are depending on you really do believe that if you'll show up at the emergency room that things will be better, things will happen, and it doesn't. Now all of a sudden, a humanist, and I think a real minister has to be a humanist is suddenly faced with the daunting task of trying to justify why God didn't show up. Why, in God's mind, it was better for this person to die in agony over the course of the next 2 months than to even give the poor soul relief. Right? And so the more supernatural my world became, the harder it was to justify and deal with. So eventually I broke off from that and went and joined this little bitty church that was non-denominational, and I understood that there was Presbyterians and Baptists and there wasn't a tongue talker in the house, you know, which made me feel a lot better. I jokingly told my wife, I said, if anybody stands up to testify and they even stutter, I'm running their ass out. Because I'm done. No more supernaturalism. This stuff is driving me crazy. And so, unfortunately, I didn't realize that there were very conservative and fundamentalist Presbyterians and very conservative and fundamentalist Baptists. Y'all weren't at all what I thought you were. And it didn't work either. And I would be up teaching or preaching, and if I used a scripture in a lighthearted way, trying to basically say, love your neighbor as yourself, and if that wasn't the original intent of the writer, then somebody would stand up during the middle of my sermon and say, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, man, if we was back in the Pentecostal church, you'd be in such trouble. I'd have your butt dragged down to this altar, and we'd pray that devil of interruption out of you. But you couldn't do it in that situation. And so eventually I just drifted away and made up excuses of why I left. All at the same time, I was involved in politics. And it added to this identity now, because everybody who knew me in a community, a little town of only 10,000, I'm telling you, I am an out-and-out ex-preacher atheist in the middle of a town of only 10,000. Do you know what it's like to go to the post office and know that everybody at the post office knows you're an atheist? You know, I mean, it makes you wait entirely too long to get another roll of toilet paper from Walmart. Yeah, it's the last resort. There's no toilet paper. Okay, I'm going. You know. So here I am, involved in politics, and everybody knows me, and everybody knows my background. And walking through Walmart, as a matter of fact, and even today, if there's anybody left who doesn't know, you could go with me, and people would stop and talk to me about politics and talk to me about things, and when it was all said and done, they would say, "We know you're God's man. We know you're God's man. We know you're God's man." Now, how do you deal with all of that when you know you're not God's man because there's no God to be the man of? Right? And so what you ultimately do, but only whenever the scales tip out of your control, then you commit identity suicide. And that's what makes, as I reiterate, a group like yourself so important, because it gives the real person a place to go. It gives the real person a place to fall and try to regroup and try to rebuild and try to learn what even their favorite color might actually be and what their favorite kind of music actually is and whether they can dance or not dance without the Spirit. And so I moved completely out of politics. I moved out of all of these things, and all that was left was I had friends that would call me to come and preach, and I would go and do it, and I would preach, love your neighbors as yourself, but that identity was still hanging over my head. And I was keeping it a secret. And so one night, and this is all over the internet, so forgive me for just telling the same story over and over, but it's the most important part. One night at about midnight, I received a call from a young lady that I still remember the day that she walked in our church several years before. Just a beautiful little, just a beautiful soul. Just this beautiful little person. She walked in, and even though she was depressed, and even though she had a lot of problems going on at the time, she still lit up the room. And me and my wife and my son, we fell in love with her. And she could do anything. She could fix anything. She could make any organization work. She was just absolutely fantastic. She took over the whole production, the whole show of our church. And she got better, and things got better. And even right now on my phone, if you looked at her name on my phone, there's a hyphen behind her real name, and DeWitt is after her name because we consider her part of the family. She's blank blank DeWitt to us. And so she follows us from church to church. And now I'm out, and now I'm out of the ministry as far as I'm concerned, but nobody knows it. And I'm still carrying the weight of that identity. And I get this call at midnight, and I answer it, and I quickly go downstairs so I don't wake my wife and my son up, and I'm hiding out in the guest bathroom, and I'm talking to her. And what had happened was her brother had been in a horrible accident. Well, I knew why she was calling. Immediately, I knew why she was calling because I'd gotten that call hundreds and hundreds of times before from so many different situations. And immediately my heart started racing. I mean, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest because I knew she wanted me to pray for her. Now, this is the equivalent, to me, it's the equivalent of someone you love, your daughter, your mother, someone that you care about, someone that you feel obligated to protect and take care of and to make happy. It's that equivalent of that type of person to me, and yet you know you cannot do that for them. Maybe if she'd called a week before, maybe a month before, maybe I could have just pulled it off one last time for her. But the moment that I heard what her situation was, I knew I was going to get off of that phone without praying for her. I knew I couldn't do it. I just knew. For whatever reason, I could not do it. Now, obviously, from my mind, the reason I didn't want to pray for her is because I knew it wouldn't do any good. But I'd had an idea that it wouldn't do good before. But I still went ahead and done it to make that person feel better. But for some reason, at that moment, my conscience tipped the scale. And I could not, in good conscience, give her, even for her own emotional good at that moment, I could not give her even an ounce of false hope. I couldn't do it. Yes, I was caught between a little rock and a hard place. And at that moment, my heart place said, it's just not right to try to give her that little bit of false hope. And so I got off the phone, I did a little bit of verbal dancing, and I got off the phone probably with her thinking that I was now the stupidest pastor that she had ever known, because surely she made it clear enough that I was supposed to pray for her, and I didn't do it. So I get off the phone, and at that very moment, it was as if my life was video, and all of a sudden, it became pixelated, And everything in it became distorted. And block by block by block, pixel by pixel, they started going black. And all of the color seemed to go out of my life. And all of the pieces began to fall apart. It would be as if my life was this library, and you walked down the aisle and you just started throwing books, book after book, into the floor. I literally felt every part of my life fall apart. And this thought was in my heart: who in the world can understand this craziness? Who in the world can understand what I'm feeling right now? Who can help me? And I remembered Dan Barker's book from the early 90s. And so I Googled him. And I found out that he had this little organization that he's hooked up with, Freedom from Religion, some kind of something like that. They do some things every so often. I think they set up some displays or something. And I Googled and I saw that, and I sent him an email. And people just like yourself, Dan is just like you, literally, I know for a fact, Dan is just like you. People just like you, Dan calls me the next day and says, hey, we got this little thing going on called the Clergy Project, and Professor Dawkins has financed it and got it going, and it all became off of this study and this idea. And as I got online and I began to communicate with people just like myself, I realized this is just as unfair of a form of discrimination that's ever existed for any other type of person that's ever been on the planet. There is no legitimate reason that a 17-year-old who makes a lifelong decision before he's even old enough to vote or buy a beer should not, after giving it his full attempt of 25 years, he should have the right to do something else, to express his individuality in a different way. And as I began to communicate, I realized that I only had 3 choices. Obviously, one of them I've made. But the other 2 choices were, I could come in every evening, find American Choppers on cable somewhere, I could go to work, do my secular job, and just come in every evening and just sit quietly, mind my own business, not create any problems, and in essence pretend to believe what I no longer believed. Because that's really the bottom line. Either you believe it, or you're pretending to believe it. That's the only 2 choices. Either you believe it, or you don't, or you're pretending to believe it when you don't. That's all there is. And that's what, unfortunately, Christianity calls faith, is pretending to believe something you don't believe is faith. I could sit quietly in my chair and watch TV, or I could do as I'm afraid some do. I could just justify it all in my mind somehow and pretend to believe and continue to make a living carrying that rock around in my shoe with a tipped-over scale in my mind. But I knew I couldn't do that, because what has propelled me from the very beginning has been 2 motivations: to know the truth and to help people. To know the truth and to help people. To know the truth and to help people. And all of a sudden I saw, when I talked to these other members of the Clergy Project, I saw that if I went ahead and broke out, if I went ahead and made a splash, if I went ahead and confessed my unbelief, then maybe for once, because I knew the truth now, I could finally live the truth, but also maybe I could help some people. The good news is, though I come to you weary, road weary, emotionally weary, broken, the good news, though, is that I'm no longer stuck between a little rock and a hard place. Because now I'm expressing my individuality no matter who likes it, no matter who doesn't accept it. And now I live in a hard place. And I live with the most loving people that civilization has ever produced. And I thank you for that. That's all I got.
And I get the first question. All right. I've read, I think it was from Dan Barker, or perhaps it was from other atheists that mentioned, oh, by the way, if anybody needs to sneak off to the restroom, feel free. Go right ahead. Otherwise, we take a break. It's hard to get everybody back in the room again. Like I said, I think it was Dan Barker. It could be some other atheist online. It was talking about the way a lot of ministers originally get their first seed of doubt is going through seminary, because their whole life they've studied the Bible in a devotional manner, just being spoon-fed the happy hoo-hoo verses and whatnot, but then they go and they actually learn the historical comparisons of the Gospels, and that, hey, this doesn't match up to this, and this guy obviously copied this guy, and that's when the seed of doubt is planted. Did you, as a Pentecostal minister, go to any formal seminary like that? Or
no, actually, the branch of Pentecostalism that I belong to discouraged it. Did not want you to go. Not surprisingly. And actually, it was because of struggling with the concept of eternal punishment that I began to do a more scholarly search of the Bible, or a research in the Bible. And that's what began to break the ice, and I began to see all of these other forms of theology than what I had been told. So no, I did not.
This is actually related to what Dave was saying. Even in my own family, I've seen different reasons for people going from Christianity to atheism.
Right.
Of the clergy that you've met, what would you say is the major reason that people make that kind of a change? Is it reason and science? Is it biblical scholarship? Is it confronting the problem of evil? Or what kind of thing typically have you seen these preachers go from?
Right. I think it might not be fair for me to speak for everybody, because even in the Clergy Project, these are busy people, and I feel like they're maybe even a little guarded, even inside the Clergy Project, even though it's anonymous. I think that there is an emotional component, and maybe the most theological argument related to this emotional component is, trying to understand the origin of evil and human suffering. I think so many of these ministers, whenever you have someone that you pray for and you pray for and you pray for in your family and they don't get better, that's a single incident, a very powerful incident, but that's a single incident in your life. That preacher or pastor has that going on all around him. He's experiencing that disappointment and ultimately disillusionment. He's experiencing it multiple times. And so I think the weight of trying to justify and keep people in the fold when all this human suffering is so unexplainable by religion, I think that's the catalyst. And then once they begin to deal with all those emotions, I think that then opens them up to say, does anybody have an answer? And then they start coming across science and reason and maybe other theological arguments, I think that's what forces the issue by so many of us. I know that is what has forced the issue, is just, how do you justify this? How do you justify it? And it may be different for a lot of people. And another important thing about inside the Clergy Project, these ministers, and it's male and female, and there's all types of denominations, and there's even now a couple of different religions within it. They come from so many different backgrounds. I don't know if we'll ever have a single issue that would rate highest as an example. But I know for me, it absolutely was trying to help with human suffering.
I really like that metaphor that you have of the rock in the shoe, and that's what it feels like to walk around with this, gnawing doubt while you're living a life that is, kind of hypocritical in light of that doubt. Right. And that an experimental psychologist would call that the construct of cognitive dissonance.
Right.
You have two competing thoughts or behaviors that are incompatible and don't make sense, and that arouses anxiety and difficulty. And so I'm thinking about that, and I'm also thinking about, I think of religion as a consumer product, actually.
Yes, it is. That's right.
It has benefits and it has costs.
That's right.
And it has a wide range of different categories of benefits. And but one of the costs is that you get to walk around believing something that is going to put a rock in your shoe, that's going to be a constant annoyance. And I was just wondering if you had any ideas for additional costs that, besides just the time you spend having to wake up early on a weekend, which is ridiculous. But,
right.
The additional
you don't know how many
costs.
groups I've been to that have it on Sunday morning. I'm like, what's wrong with you people?
Any other costs you can think of?
Yes, there's lots of cost, and don't let me forget that part, because I want to touch on one other very important part you brought up that only people in my particular situation will be aware of. That cognitive dissonance. everyone in religion, maybe that's too general. I would think at least most people, and definitely the people I've associated with in religion, especially in Pentecostalism, where there's a lot of emotion and a lot of drama and a lot of, just drama, that's the best word for it, is playing a role. They're playing a role. And they're intentionally playing a role. They're accepting that, because most of Pentecostals, I don't know how many of you know Pentecostals, most of them wouldn't run up and down and shout inside the library. Now, every so often, a very unique situation would happen where they feel compelled to do that. But by and large, they're just going to act like everybody else when they're in Walmart or whatever. But when they get into the flow of the service, when they get into the expectation of the show, of the service, then at that moment, they volunteer themselves to play a role. Now they're going to be a character that they're not when they're at home or when they're somewhere else. The problem is that they don't even realize that's what they're doing. As Dr. Darrell Ray talks about the God virus, it flames up, it gets inflamed in the service, and it kind of dies back down when you're walking through Walmart. So there is this role playing that happens. There's definitely this role playing. What happens to the minister when he becomes aware of what he does and does not believe, he also becomes conscious of the role that he's playing. Where it would have been subconscious and it would have been natural because it's just a mean that you have, you've received, now all of a sudden you see it literally as a role. And there's this great awkwardness to it now. It's like thinking about kissing. You think about it too hard, and all of a sudden, you forget how it works, And so that begins to happen inside these people's lives. And if their exit strategy is too long, and that's what I call it, them trying to figure out a way to get out of the ministry and not lose everything, if their exit strategy is too long, they are then forced to play that role intentionally, on purpose. They have to walk up to the pulpit and intentionally pretend to be someone they're not. And it's about the only way that their conscience can handle it is they say to themselves, I'm going to go play this role for a moment. And if it wasn't me, it'd be 100 other people who would be glad to be here. All the church people would still be here. They'd still be giving their tithes. They'd still be doing everything they're doing. And if I didn't do it, they would just replace me with somebody else. It's not like me leaving is going to destroy Christianity, right? And so they voluntarily play this role. So there's a lot of role playing that goes on. I didn't want to forget that part. As far as the cost, I can tell you so easily, beyond the shadow of a doubt, what to me is the primary cost. And that is the loss of individuality. It is the loss of individuality. If you know people who belong to a form of Christianity that is so lukewarm and so watered down that they can just go through life doing whatever they want to do, then they're not the problem, because they just belong to a Rotary Club where in their book the president had to get killed. That's all it is. Real Christianity, and the part of Christianity that we're all really up against and trying to save our culture from, says you must decrease so that Christ can increase. You must die so that Christ can live, right? That version of Christianity steals, robs the only thing that a person will ever truly own in this life, and that is themselves, their own individuality. Now, as being free thinkers and non-believers, now we realize that there's not another life to go and enjoy more than this one. There's not, we can't sacrifice this one because we got that other one waiting on us. Well, just that knowledge alone makes the commodity of individuality that much more precious. And so that's what I think that they pay a price for that's greater than any other thing, greater than time, greater than their finances, greater than, voting in crazy people for all the rest of us have to put up with. It's really that loss of individuality, because I don't know, maybe it's almost merciful that they die and don't realize that they're not getting the prize. Because it'd really stink to find out at the last minute. Yeah.
Hi. I have a confusion. Having been raised a Catholic, we didn't, and leaving it in my 20s, it was fairly easy to leave. I'm from Wisconsin, that state where freedom from religion,
Yeah,
and
right.
fairly easy. But what I've never understood, and I've asked Protestant friends and so on, is because once you didn't believe in the authority of the Pope and all that hierarchy, it was fairly easy to leave. But it seems the Bible seems to be the thing that Protestants are so connected with.
Right.
And having then read it later in life and seeing the misogyny and the murder and I have asked my Protestant friends, but they have never wanted to discuss it. How do you justify, I mean, maybe now you can tell me, because
Absolutely.
How do you justify all of that horror, which I understand was civilization at that time. I can understand it historically.
Right.
But that this is a beautiful, loving God that...
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's fairly easy especially within Pentecostal ranks, or maybe all forms of the Protestant movement. Let me give you an illustration real quick. Let's pretend this is a Bible. I've actually got this really nice black ledger that I toted around some notes in, and I've got so many strange looks because it really looks like a leather Bible that I just have stopped bringing it. Actually, Dr. Delray said, "You're not taking that in, are you?" So no, I've already learned not to do that. With Catholicism, there is the whole worldview of Catholicism is very dependent upon the legitimacy of the Pope, and not on your own legitimacy. It's on the legitimacy of the Pope. And so, if you do take that away, then the whole thing starts falling into pieces, and it's easier to walk away from. The very word Protestant, as you already know, protest, right, is really the beginning of religious commercialism. Okay? The Protestant movement is the beginning of bringing religion into the marketplace and about being able to sell a better product than the guy before you. And that's why Protestantism has this fantastic history. You know, first it's Kmart, and then it's Target, and then it's Walmart, and then, you just substitute names, Martin Luther, John Wesley, whatever. It's just a better product is being refined all the time. And so this hidden version of commercialism inside of the Protestant worldview is really about this Burger King spirituality that says, have it your own way. Okay? Because as a true Protestant, you don't even have to have a preacher under certain circumstances. All right? You just really, under true Protestantism, you really only have to have a preacher to hear the gospel. And then once you hear the gospel, you're now kings and priests all. Everybody in Protestantism is a king and priest. They're all just as equally in tune with God as anybody else is. Okay? Now, the connection between this worldview and this individualism that is supposed to be existing in Protestantism but obviously isn't, is the Bible. And the fact that I can take that Bible and I can read it and superimpose upon it me. I mean, that's what you do. As you study it, as you read it, you superimpose upon it yourself. And so that gives almost nothing the weight as the Pope has. Because now it's all about me. It's not about this guy in Vatican City that we can discredit and destroy a whole religion, because now all of religion is now drawn into this very tight circle, and now it's really all in my own heart. It's really all in my own head. And it's really about how I interpret it, and it's really about how I look at it. So the way that they'll justify the cruelties that you find in the Scripture, the very first thing you'll always hear was, well, that's Old Testament. Right? Can anybody say amen? Yeah. That's Old Testament. That ain't Jesus. That's Old Testament. That's Old Testament. So selfish, so self-centered is the Protestant worldview about spirituality that they will justify in their heart the drowning of all of the innocent babies in the flood, the brutal slaying of all of the Canaanites and all of the people that, happened to already be living where the Jews needed to pass through, What kind of troublemakers were those poor people, All of that can be justified in the one thought that in order to maintain the purity of the Jewish bloodline and the Jewish religion, so that Jesus could be born in his proper, holy, undefiled, sinless context, so that he could then reside in my heart and that I could then live forever. That's how twisted and self-centered modern-day Christianity truly is. It's let all of those babies drown so that Jesus can be born of a virgin. Let all of those other tribes be killed and slain so that the Jews aren't defiled, not in their bodies and not in their spirits, not in their doctrines, so that Jesus can be born properly at the right time. Unfortunately, it happened to be 2,000 years ago, which has now made it a little difficult to verify.
So then it is still being chosen in a way?
Yes,
to the Hebrews?
absolutely. There is the egotism that exists within the Protestant version of Christianity is extraordinary. It's indefensible. Because if I'm truly a Protestant who truly believes this modern day version of being saved by grace, then, and you don't, if you really get down into the nuts and bolts of it, okay, now the majority of Christianity now is made up of an Arminian point of view that says, the Holy Spirit gives a general call and then people yield to it and that's the specific call and, whosoever will and all of these kind of things. But if you really get down into the nuts and bolts of it, faith is a gift that either you're given or you're not given. And so ultimately, if you end up in heaven, it's because you got this gift. And the people who end up in hell, it's because they didn't get this gift. Okay? Think of how incredibly self-centered it is, because almost everybody thinks they got the gift. Right? Almost everybody thinks that God actually loved them more than those other people. Now, do they all dig into it that deeply to understand that's what they're saying? No, not at all. Not at all. Because all they hear is the bumper sticker version of theology. That's all they hear. God said it, I believe it, that makes it so, whatever. All right, that's all they really hear. But they don't understand that to a person who is a humanist, who loves truth and people more than that pebble in their shoe, they don't understand how horrible all of those things actually are when you begin to dig into them. Am I the first Protestant to explain that?
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Of course, that doesn't deal with the fact that the New Testament is also full of evil.
Oh, yes, exactly. That's right. The New Testament is completely full of evil. Jesus is very comfortable with saying, straight is the gate, narrow is the way, and few there will be that enter therein, or that find it. He's very comfortable with those things. Now, don't get me wrong. A good apologist, a good contemporary preacher can take all of that and segment it and break it all down and show you that that's not really talking about us and Christians. It's really talking about the Jews, and Jesus was being a revivalist at that moment. And I mean, it is the Jews of old, so who cares if they few of them found it. All of it can be brought back around to make it warm and fuzzy if you try very, very hard. But then you're left with a question: why is it so damn complicated? This thing, when what is laying in the balance? When what is laying in the balance is everyone that you and I know and love, including our own skins, is going to burn in hell forever and ever and ever, and it's made complicated to avoid? I mean, it's literally like creating one exit, one fire escape out of this building, right? And having to belong to Mensa to understand the directions to be able to get out. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Who's next? I'm sorry. I'm preaching now.
Yeah, I actually have a couple of questions. There are a few of us who've been whispering over here wondering why the heck you haven't brought suit against that employer of yours.
Oh, yeah. So I should address that at first. You want me to get that real quick first?
Get that, and then I'll ask you the real question.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, and you may tell me I'm completely wrong about this. What makes it complicated is this. First, he is a contractor. He has governmental contracts, but he does not work for the government. Okay, I was a building inspector. And what happened was that he and I were very good friends, and we became best friends while I was working for him. Basically, he just calls up and says, unfortunately my partner died, and I knew his partner, a very, very lovely man. And all these people that I'm overtly making fun of are actually people that at one time did love me. And so I still actually love them. But he calls me up and says, would you like to go to work for me? So without any real paperwork, without any real anything, I went to work for him, and he just, cut me a check every month. I was contract labor working under a contractor who had these things. And the way all of this fell out was, supposedly, I'll never know all the truth to it, is that he passes by the jurisdiction, passes by the office where we work out of, and this gets hit on him. He gets hit with this at like 10:30 in the morning and fires me by noon. And so yeah, exactly, my best friend. Exactly, it's my best friend. I mean, it's unimaginable. Even more than that, I had went to him months earlier and told him what was going on about the things that I was involved with, to the best of my ability to explain it then. Every night I feel like I get a little better explaining what's going on. And I explained it to him, and he said, that's no problem, it doesn't matter. His exact words was, if they call you a full-blown atheist, it's not going to change our relationship. Everything's fine. So on December the 1st, he passes by this office. They hit him with this stuff, and that's how he described it. He said, I got hit with this morning. They hit him with this stuff, and by noon he's ready to fire me. He throws it out on the table and says, this is what I got hit with this morning, and the Pentecostals who run the parish aren't happy. That was his word. Quote, unquote. The Pentecostals who run this parish aren't happy. And from there it just went downhill. And so my understanding is contracts, he said, all of this just gets really complicated and convoluted. And to be quite honest with you, I don't want to sue him. I really don't. I don't want us to lose our home, and I don't want to lose my marriage over everything, going to hell, which I'm not going to. But, I really don't want to sue. Now, who I would like to have shaking in their boots is whoever those Pentecostals are that weren't happy. That's who I'd like to see intimidated and taught a lesson that they can't do this, because this is discrimination, which is nothing less than demanding that someone not be the individual that they are. And so, I don't know. Maybe we can talk afterwards. You can give me some good advice.
We'll talk.
Good.
Okay, my real question, and you touched on it just a little bit, was how your wife felt about all this, and did you share with her your doubt as it started developing, and how she felt about it? You said you met her in a Pentecostal relationship kind of thing, which is completely foreign to me. Mom was Presbyterian and Dad was Catholic, so I came from a mixed marriage and rebelled against church real early.
Right. Well, she her religious experience started when she was 13, by no choice of her own. Her family had basically been backsliders. Does everybody understand backsliders? I had several people where I've been that didn't know what backsliders meant. Does everybody understand? Because I want to make sure. Okay. Yeah, a backslider is a person who does believe but isn't participating. So they feel bad about it. They live their whole life thinking they should be going to church, they should be doing this, they should be doing that, but for whatever reason, they're just not putting forth the energy to do it. So the church calls them backsliders, and if the person feels guilty enough, they may even refer to themselves as a backslider, but they still believe. Lots of Pentecostal backsliders actually believe that they have to go back to the church that they stopped going to in order to be saved, that they have to actually go back to that church to start over. And so that's a backslider. So they were believers, but they just weren't participating and felt bad about it. And so that's the way it was until age 13, and a revival happened in town, and they went, and in the Pentecostal world, you pray back through. And you get refilled with the Holy Ghost. And so that's what happened in the revival. And so instantly their lives were changed. Well, up till that time, she was a tomboy. She was the younger of 3 siblings, and she ran in the woods and played basketball and did all of these things that were now going to be hampered or forbidden due to the holiness standards of the Pentecostal world. So by the time she was 17, 18, and was working in the office at the grocery store that she worked at, she would schedule her time to work during church services, and wasn't into it at all, but out of respect to her family, she was still dressing the dress and walking the walk and talking the talk, but wasn't interested in it. Then when she fell in love with me, it just so happened I was a Pentecostal preacher, and so she gave it all another big try, and she left her job, and we went out on the evangelistic field, and she found out she was right, that it sucks. And I drug her around across the country, for 20 years, and ups and downs and all these problems, and she's been very lovely about it. She's been very supportive. Every relationship is strained by this type of drama, obviously, But we're cool. My son, everybody always finds this part interesting. We have one son, he's 19. He's a demigod. He's like this tall and looks just like Thor. He looks like Thor walking in. We actually raised him as a free thinker. Blows everybody away. But in the back of my mind, I had this thing about my dad being a preacher's son and how that turned out. And because all of this got flipped up on her when she was 13, neither one of us wanted to make home church to him. We just didn't want to do it. And so we didn't pray at home. Surely we prayed from time to time, and I was always on the phone with people pastoring or people were over. But we didn't have forced Bible studies or, we raised him really as a free thinker. So he came out way ahead of me. He's my hero. He's tough. He's bad to the bone. They're as cool with me and with this as a person can be whenever one individual has destroyed their world, And so, outside of that little thing, they're thrilled. My son actually is thrilled because he's at that right age that he's ready, man. He's ready to take on the world and is taking it on. Matter of fact, as me and Sky were driving up here, he asked me over a text, he said, "Have you seen my Facebook page?" And I wrote back, "No, should I?" He's like, "No, it's cool." Yeah. Who else we got?
While you're explaining backsliders, what's Dominionism?
Oh, Dominionism?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dominionism, and it's probably a derogatory term. I don't ever remember hearing the Dominionists that I was around call themselves that. Dominionism, from my perspective, I'm sure there's a theological explanation that's greater than my experience, were charismatics who believed that it was their God-given mission to take over the government. That's right.
To get Christians in office, yes.
Yeah, put Christians in office, from top to bottom, and along with that is all this other stuff that was really just driving me insane to have to be around and to deal with this thing called spiritual mapping, which is, nobody knows what spiritual mapping is? Oh, you're going to love this. This is awesome. Let's say, what's a big problem that Little Rock has, say socially or economically in this area? Is like poverty high or crime highs or anything, any big? What is it? Race relations. Okay, race relations. Okay. A spiritual mapper would come into Arkansas, drive around praying in the Spirit, driving around trying to feel after the Spirit, and would probably deduce, when it was all said and done, that the reason that the race relations are so tense and so bad is because within the realm of the principalities and powers, that there is an angel, a fallen angel, that has been given control over this community, a racial angel, a spirit of racism, okay, has been given free reign over this area. Are y'all enjoying this? Is this good? It ain't funny, no. Yes, I'm telling you, exactly. And has been given free reign because of the actions of people in the past, that it has allowed, am I telling the truth, Sky? This is right, isn't it? Has allowed these demonic forces free reign. Okay, so until you get to the root of this, like somewhere in the past, there was probably maybe the church wasn't handling itself right racially, or maybe there was a politician that didn't do something right. Until you discern in the Spirit the root cause that allowed all of this to start, then it's just going to keep going. But if you can discern the root cause, then some of the techniques that you can do to make this better is you can get a politician who represents all government, just that one guy suddenly can represent everybody. And then you can get a preacher who can suddenly represent all of Christianity, and you can get them together, and if they will repent to each other publicly and ask for forgiveness, ask God for forgiveness, and people will then begin to work from that perspective, then it will weaken the power of those demonic forces, and race relations will get better. Yeah, it was simple, and y'all just been screwing it up.
Why can't they just have an exorcism?
Yeah, well, the problem is finding that one individual that needs to be exorcised, Because it is an exorcism, but it's the exorcism of a city, or the exorcism of a region, or the exorcism of a nation. It really is the same idea of exorcism. It is. He's the director, so I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to ask, how can we as a group be supportive of somebody who has just come out as an atheist? Because, and I don't know if I'm going to say this exactly right, and some people can help me, but like as an atheist, and sometimes some of us are called militant atheists, right. we don't want to condone somebody coming in and talking about spiritualism right. and the church and trying to get us to believe something that we don't see any evidence of, but then again, we don't want to attack them right. and throw them out the door and make them feel like that we don't want them here and that they're not welcome. So sure. How can we do that?
Yeah, it's actually easier than you would think at this point because of Recovering from Religion, the organization that I work with. Recovering from Religion is almost always sponsored by someone that's already in a freethinker group or a skeptics group or a humanist group, but with that very intention of kind of having a subset, kind of a buffer. You know, in the church it'd be the vestibule before you get into the sanctuary. You know, have a little subgroup that can stomach a little bit more, you know, about religion, and it's almost, I don't even want to use the right words. It's a support group. Some words are being used so often, so much that it's giving people the wrong impression. But it's a support group, little small support groups where those people can come and they can be vulnerable and they can be individuals, and those issues can begin to be dealt with before they move on into the more complicated or the purer version of free thinking, you know, that we share with. But that's the easiest way. And if somebody just goes to recoveringfromreligion.org, on that website now, they can click to try to find a group, or they can click to try to start a group, or they can contact us to try to get materials about groups. I mean, that's my mission right now, is introducing Recovering from Religion to people like yourself and saying, let's start a little small group somewhere. You know, obviously the ultimate mission in all of that is to get those people moving on into wherever they want to move. You know, who knows what their individuality is going to cause them to want to go do. But we want to help them recover. I think, this is just me, and I'm very, very young in all of this, I think some of the missteps that have taken place in atheism is because there's a lot of people out there who haven't recovered from religion yet. You know, that is a true, legitimate issue that needs to be dealt with. And so that's, you know, short answer, recoveringfromreligion.org.
We do have a Recovering from Religion group, but the person that was over it passed away about almost 2 years ago, I guess, or a year and a half ago, and so it hasn't been very active. So we do have one, but it's just not active right now. So
and not only can we help with that by getting somebody to do that, but now what's never happened before. Dr. Delroy writes the God virus. People start contacting him, and he can see there's a lot of recovery that needs to happen from religion. So he kind of throws this concept out, and a bunch of great activists got together throughout the country and really just made it happen. But there was no center point. None of it tied back in anywhere. It's just a bunch of groups doing their things, which is obviously the ultimate goal anyway. But now that we've got a national level that's trying to help all of these, you know, autonomous groups, now we've got resources that we can supply. So it's really more like Recovering from Religion 2.0 now, because you're not as much on your own trying to figure it all out as you used to be, to the extent that a subset of that is another project Dr. Delroy's working on called the Therapist Project. Because another complaint that he's heard is when people try to go and seek therapy, they unwillingly end up in the arms of someone who's going to try to be religious with them. Try to fix them. Say, what's your problem? You don't, you know, you got to, not only do you hate your mama, but you hate Jesus, you know, so we're going to try to fix this. Right. And so he's creating a registry of therapists who will commit to only using secular therapies. We're not worried about what they believe, because that's not our business to be telling people what to believe or not believe. We're only worried about them being committed to only using secular therapies. And so that's going to be another piece that we can now offer that we've never been able to offer before. So, anybody else?
I just got a quick question about the Clergy Project. Now, you had to go seek out Dan Barker and
Right.
ask him questions. Does the Clergy Project actively send out letters to all the preachers in America saying, hey, here we are, do you have any doubts? Come see us?
No, not really. The Clergy Project is a really interesting situation because, number one, it's completely volunteers, and y'all will understand what that's like, so that limits your resources and limits what you can do. But it's also trying to make sure that it maintains a certain identity. And part of what it doesn't want to be identified as is being evangelical. You know, trying to preach the good news of, you know, being able to come out, you know. It wants to really just be there as a almost benign resource that people can come to. The biggest step that we've taken is there is a website. And, you know, I'm doing these presentations, and others are doing interviews, and so it's slowly getting out. But the last time that I saw a report, because I'm a screener, what happens is people go to the website, they fill out an application, that all comes to the first screener as a form of email, and from there we start talking to them, and we start trying to figure out, are they for real? You know, or do they really not believe what they say they don't believe? You know, because we don't want anybody messing with the guys that we're trying to help and the ladies that we're trying to help have an exit strategy. And so the screening process is pretty intense, pretty good. Fortunately, now that I'm over recovering from religion, the people who don't make it through the screening process can come be with us. You know, for whatever reason that they didn't make it. Maybe they're still deist. You know, and which almost every minister that I've ever dealt with who eventually lost all belief in supernaturalism had a phase of deism, you know, before they got to that point. Well, when they contact us, if they're still deist, you know, so far that hasn't been acceptable yet. But it is cool to recover from religion. We'll help you. We'll walk you through these things. So really, it's almost like word of mouth. There's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff out there about it. And I know what I was going to say, and so as of to date, I think there was about 145 that are in the project. And I think the last time I saw just for this month, there was like 33 new applicants that were somewhere in the process. So it's ramping up pretty quick. Yeah.
Do you have you had very many people that tried? Did you have very many people that actually tried to trick you, or?
Not that I know of. Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, not yet. And it only ministers like myself can be screeners. And so, you know, we know what we're listening for. And at this point, it would take someone whose version of their mission for Christ and spirituality and so forth would have to be so twisted and so watered down that they would have to say things that the average religious person would believe was blasphemy. You know, so that helps.
I'm not sure if this was your Pentecostal denomination, but can you explain the restrictions on clothing and hair styling?
Yeah, absolutely. That was exactly mine, yes. We had no facial hair. We had long sleeves. The women wore long skirts. They had long hair, couldn't cut their hair. Back in my day, before Pentecostals got so liberal, there was no television, no movies, no sports, nothing culture-oriented, none of those things. And it's really unbelievably simple to explain. They were founded in the 1940s. That's it. That is the answer. They were founded in the 1940s and began to really pick up steam. The United Pentecostal Organization was actually founded in 1945. Now, there had been some versions of Pentecostals prior to that, but, you know, what we really now know as Pentecostals was in the 40s and 50s. And so they immediately began to engage in a culture war. What had happened was, back in the early 1900s, you had the Azusa Street Revival in California, Los Angeles, California. A lot of the people who were attracted to that were what were called holiness people, who were who they believed in the second work of grace, all right, sanctification, that the Holy Spirit was working through you to help you live a holier life. And the gauge of that level of holier life wasn't always just your behavior, but was also your denial of culture. Okay? So as culture continued to evolve, there was immediately a resistance to that evolution or to those fashionable changes because of you wanting to show how much holier, you know, how dedicated you were. And so those same, is it time? We got to get out of here? Okay, thank you. And so those same people are the ones that ultimately went into the Azusa Street revival and became what was known as Pentecostals, tongue talkers, theologically known as charismatics. And so they started out with this idea of sanctification, of showing your righteousness through how you dressed. And so when they were formalized in the United Pentecostals in 1945-ish, they drew the line in the sand and said, this is what people look like when they're right, and everything beyond this is not as holy, is not as right. And what's so interesting to watch is how it has changed, how it has evolved. Because if you know any Pentecostals, they don't look like they used to look, you know. One real quick story. Can I tell one quick story? I felt so sorry for my pastor, my Pentecostal pastor, because for a moment there, we had this really good-sized youth group, which was made up of some young ladies, obviously. And so ladies will tend to want to attract the guys, just like the guys want to attract the ladies. But here they are Pentecostal, and they have to wear a certain, clothes etiquette. So all of a sudden, all the young ladies started coming in and wearing shorter and shorter and shorter skirts because they're kind of competing with each other a little bit, just like guys compete for attention. Well, the preacher notices it, so he gets up and says, all skirts have to be below the knee. So he hammers that in for a little while, and they all submit, and they all start wearing it below the knee. But humanity still raises up its ugly head. So, yes, it's below the knee, but it's so tight you can see their underoos. And so he gets up and says, they got to be below the knee, and they can't be too tight. And so he hammers that in for a while, but human nature raises his ugly head, and they start wearing a split all the way up to their underoos. It's got to be below the knee, and it can't be too tight, and it can't have a split. And so all of a sudden they start coming in with bows this big in the back of their hair, just trying to make sure they could attract the attention they were looking for. Yeah. Individualism, it is going to win.
All right, thanks. Jerry's going to be joining us at in the basement of the Flying Saucer here immediately following this. So let's give him a round of applause.